Okay, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of the editing workbook. This here is the prototype that I ordered for myself, so as you can see there is no pretty cover image, but and there's also not a spot to put your project title there, but what you could do, or what I did, is just use like an envelope label and write the book title on there. I still actually need to do it on this one. I haven't, but these are the two prototypes I ordered for myself. I am using both of them currently for different projects. This is for my funny sci-fi. This is for my steampunk western. I'm going to use this one though because I filled this one out more to show you. There is a spot to put your project title in the ones that you will get, but also it's glossy, so if the permanent marker won't even stay, I haven't tried it myself, but if it won't, you could just use the label for that as well. So anyway, first we have the character chart to keep track of your characters. This first appear, I use to track when that specific character first appeared in the book. I actually didn't fill out all of these, so I don't even know. I'd have to go back and check, but it also helps to keep track of everyone's ages. And then dialect, for me, I have a lot of characters that have like a Western drawl. Blah, blah, blah. So I use this a lot when I make the spreadsheet to send to my narrator. It's very helpful for that as well. So I have quite a bit of space here in case you have a lot of characters. You have a lot of space for your characters. And then here is where we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the workbook. So each chapter has a few pages of a layout. So each chapter has this main page here, a place for your chapter summary, a lined notes page, and then a blank notes page. So this is how I use it essentially. So of course, you have your basic information for your chapter. The moon phases, my characters notice the moon quite a lot. And it helps to give your book some realism there, that your moon isn't going back and forth unrealistically in its phases. It also really helps, I've found, for nighttime scenes, how much light the characters are going to have to see by, unless of course you're writing a contemporary novel. But for fantasy, and like for me, my Western, it's heavy on the Western, so there's not a lot of electric lights out there in the wilderness, so it's very helpful. Sometimes these might get more filled out, but for me in the desert, this doesn't change very often. So it will later in this book. They end up going to a place more in the Midwest, so you get variable weather, but that's helpful to keep track of that and to also remind you to throw in some varying weather, right? Don't want it to always be boringly sunny out, right? So I also like to color code things. It helps it stick out a little bit more for me. Crutch words, those are the ones that, you find yourself repeating all the time. So for me, it's like still, just, finally, slammed. I like to use that one a lot. So I'll write those in green here. What I usually do is I will read through each chapter. I will fill out all of these things. If I notice I'm using a word a lot, I will write it here. Also, since my character tends to drop his G's a lot, there are some words that he does not do that with. So I wrote those here in blue so that I know to keep consistent with those words throughout the whole book, right? But what I do is I don't bother with the crutch words my first pass through. I'll read the whole thing. I'll fill out this workbook. Then I go back through the workbook and I do a search on my crutch words here, and I will eliminate them, change them. I also use this, for instance, here I put jailhouse. So that means I'm going to go through and make sure that I have jailhouse as all one word versus being two separate words. And here, this is actually, it's hard to tell with my handwriting, but mayor capitalized versus mayor lowercase. So I will go back through and make sure that those are all correct as well. But I just write that here for myself to remind me to go back, and check later, so I can make sure I'm consistent and also grammatically correct. And then these two pages are pretty self-explanatory. The chapter summary, of course, I always try to keep it fairly brief, but some of these actually take up the whole page, so I tried to give you plenty of space there, depending on how detailed you want to get. The notes I have been using to sort of keep track of things that are not necessarily a summary, but might need to be to come into play later in future books, or that I want to make sure I touch on again in later chapters. So for instance, here I have, I made sure to mention that the hostler in this one town is a drunk. So if they go back to that town again in another book, I can be sure that I remember, hey, that guy's a drunk. That might come into play later. And then also, Holt had saved Van's neck too many times to count, quote unquote. So, that could also come into play if I want to specify it later, etc., etc. I have a basis down for that. So yeah, you can see like Saddlehorn, one word or two word, backwards, S or no S. I need to make sure those things are consistent. So here you can see on the notes, I was keeping track of the bullets in the various 6 guns. So you can use that for here as well. In the notes section, the blank notes page is really helpful. You can go ahead and just write on it if you need extra space for anything, but also sometimes if you want to sketch out like a map of anything, a building, a country, a room even, or if you're trying to like sketch out a battle or something where everyone's at, etc., etc., you can kind of use this blank page for that. I have a few other things I wanted to show in here. So here's another example of something you can use notes for. Before I actually even started my editing phase, I knew that there was some things that I was going to need to change. So I basically wrote reminders to myself. So like when I edit, be sure you address this. And then down here in red, these are the things that after I finish this main pass through, when I'm doing my crutch word search and all this fun stuff, I'm going to also read all over all these red notes and make sure that I addressed all of those things, because those are the things that are coming up as I read through the book that I want to be sure come up later. So I want to make sure that I address those in later chapters. And in case I didn't in the first draft, I want to make sure I work that in now on my editing phase here. And just more examples. I had to kind of rewrite this chapter, so I made sure to, say what is not happening anymore and what is now happening. So that's helpful. And you can see I just highlight what moon phase it is, which is very nice because the full moon actually was an important factor in that chapter, so that was helpful. I also sometimes use paper clips to mark my spot for various things. Anyway, you can see here at one point, this was when I was actually doing the first draft. I ended up filling out some of these initially, but this was my research and trying to find some phrases to go on their guns. So I went ahead and filled that out there. You can also use this notes page for murder math, as I call it, which there was a huge battle. So I kept track of who was dead, who was injured, how many were left here. And for some of my extra pages in the back, since I had 5 chapter pages I didn't use, these are all research notes for tarot cards. So I used those pages for some research, which is nice and handy to go back and look at if I need to. And that is about it. Hopefully you all will find it as helpful as I have. Hooray!